Russian President Vladimir Putin recently joked about meddling in the 2020 US presidential election.
По секрету вам скажу, да, обязательно будем это делать.
If you're somebody who had been following Donald Trump's presidency and US politics since 2016, I think it's safe to say that you've at least at one point heard about how Trump is supposedly a Russian asset and how Russia meddled in the US presidential elections to help Trump's rise to power. These accusations have been referred to as Russiagate, and it's one that many on both the right and the left tend to view as an establishment media hoax to smear populists. However, the stories surrounding Russian meddling don't just stop there, seeing how the Russians have also been accused of meddling in other elections all across the world in recent times, ranging from Europe to Africa and Latin America, and how Russian bots have also been blamed for plenty of online disinformation and troll campaigns surrounding certain topics. Ever since Russia's relationship with Europe and North America became hostile due to its actions in Ukraine, it's almost like these days you just can't look at any news story without hearing about how the Russians are behind some sinister plot to undermine liberal democracies and are backing certain groups and causes to destroy the Western liberal order. Now, anyone who is a follower of mine is most likely already aware that I am not a fan of the Russian government or Vladimir Putin, and that I am someone who has criticized Russian state media for capitalizing on conspiracy theories as an underhand tactic to demonize Western establishments. And I don't deny that Russian disinformation campaigns are a thing. Russia, similarly to America, is a country that does have a history of meddling in foreign politics going as far back as their Soviet Union days during the Cold War, usually by sponsoring disinformation campaigns to cause chaos and division, and backing groups that benefit their interests. And with today's popularity of the internet and the recent rise of populism and distrust in the mainstream media, along with the current hostilities between the West and Russia's president being a former KGB agent, I don't think it's unlikely that the Russian government would try to repeat similar tactics in modern day times, nor do I really have an issue with people talking about it either. What I do take an issue with, however, is how some people tend to exaggerate Russian involvement in Western politics and who turn Russia into a complete boogeyman by treating it like it's the sole cause of the recent rise of disinformation and radicals. Whenever people think of conspiracy theorists, usually they tend to think of certain types of people who oppose Western liberal establishments and who view them as a sinister force in the world out to get us all. These types of people can be found in different types of groups, ranging from far-right nationalists to far-left revolutionaries and so on. However, there does seem to be a new certain type of conspiracy theorists who come off as pro-Western liberal establishments and who have instead found a different establishment to treat as their boogeyman, with that establishment, of course, being the Kremlin. Since the outbreak of the whole Trump-Russia controversy, there are certain types of American liberals and Democrats I've noticed who often take the whole idea of Russian meddling to such exaggerated lengths that they basically end up blaming the Russians for every form of disinformation and radicalization that has happened in recent years, and even going as far as accusing everyone they don't like of being Russian puppets and assets. For example, recently on Twitter, there was a claim being pushed by a guy called Dave Troy, who was accusing the website Parler of being funded by Russia, even though a quick fact check on that would instantly tell you that Parler is actually being funded by the Mercers, who are a billionaire conservative American family, not the Russians. And ever since the recent rise of the QAnon movement, one common claim that I and others have constantly seen online from some American liberals is that Q must secretly be a Russian psyop, as part of Russia's foreign policy to promote conspiracy theories and prop up radicals. Now again, I don't deny that Russia capitalizes on disinformation and radicals in foreign countries, but to claim that QAnon is part of a Russian plot and that the Russians must have secretly come up with Q with no evidence sounds pretty conspiratorial if you ask me. It sounds like a conspiracy theory about a conspiracy theory, and it's a baseless accusation that not even US intelligence is claiming. I mean, if Q is a Russian psyop, don't you think US intelligence would have found that out by now? When intelligence agencies that spend way more of their time investigating these things aren't even making the claim that you are making, it does just end up coming off as a baseless accusation. Now, I'm sure there are some Russian troll accounts on social media that pretend to be American QAnon believers to help prop up the movement, but basically claiming that the Russians created QAnon just doesn't feel based in reality and sounds like what one would consider to be a conspiracy theory. And these aren't even the only times where liberals and Democrats in the US have often peddled what could be considered anti Russian conspiracy theories or disinformation about Russian meddling. As even pointed out by Vox, there have been other untrue claims and baseless conspiracy theories about Russian meddling from many Democrats since the 2016 election, such as the claims that Donald Trump was about to resign as a result of the Russia scandal, or that Bernie Sanders and Sean Hannity are Russian agents, or that libertarian heroine Ayn Rand was a secret Russian agent charged with discrediting the American conservative movement. Now, I don't think it's unlikely that Russia preferred Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, and most likely did try to intervene in the 2016 US elections one way or another. But part of the reason why the whole Trump Russia stuff often comes off as silly and hard to take seriously is because of how many Democrats tend to exaggerate the role that Russia plays by baselessly smearing everyone they don't like as Russian puppets and making baseless conspiratorial claims about Russian involvement in things. I mean, if a Republican baselessly calling everything they don't like Soros sponsored and treating Soros like a complete boogeyman comes off as conspiratorial, doesn't that same logic also apply to calling everything you don't like Russian sponsored and treating Russia like a boogeyman? Because that essentially seems to be the path that some Democrats seem to have been heading down towards in recent years. By taking the real issue of possible Russian meddling in foreign politics, they've exaggerated it to such extreme lengths to the point where they treat Russia the same way how conservatives treat George Soros. And if anything, all it does is help Russian propagandists by giving them even more material to use to discredit any concern or accusation about Russian meddling, by pointing at hysterical and conspiratorial liberals as proof as to why you shouldn't take any of the concerns seriously. To further quote the Vox article, political experts even worry that the unfounded speculation and paranoia that infect the Russia discourse risk pushing liberals into the same black hole of conspiracy mongering and fact free insinuation that conservatives fell into during the Obama years. The fear is that this pollutes the party itself, derailing and discrediting the legitimate investigation into Russian meddling. It also risks degrading the Democratic Party, helping evaluate shameless hucksters who know nothing about policy but are willing to spread misinformation in the service of gaining power. We've already seen this story play out on the right, a story that ended in Trump's election. One of the failures of the Republican Party is the way they let the birther movement grow, and that ultimately helped Donald Trump make it to the White House. We should worry about this kind of pattern being repeated, says Brendan Meehan, a professor at Dartmouth, who studies the spread of false political beliefs. And he does have a point. At the end of the day, conspiracy theories aren't just a right wing thing. Centrists and left wingers are also capable of being pretty conspiratorial minded, and may often try to find simplistic scapegoats for things they don't like in the world. What many liberals don't seem to grasp is that Russia isn't the sole reason why online disinformation and radicalization exists. There are often a number of other factors that play a role into these things that cause people to fall down this path. When you look at the recent rise of right wing populism in Europe, it wasn't caused simply because of right wing groups receiving funds from Russia or RT publishing articles pushing white genocide conspiracy theories. There were certain factors that played a role in it as well, such as the refugee crisis, the euro crisis, and Islamic terrorist attacks, which these groups heavily capitalized on for votes. Whether we like to accept it or not, there are certain factors that do play a role in people becoming radicalized, and there are often real issues which extremists tend to exploit in order to attract support from the general public, such as poverty and corruption, for example. One of the biggest issues with liberals when they simply focus on the fact that certain groups are being backed by Russia or are useful idiots for Russia is that it often ignores the problems with those groups and doesn't really go into detail as to why those groups are wrong and should be opposed. When you have, let's say, for example, a neo-Nazi or a Stalinist group in the US, and you're criticizing them for being Russian assets, you're not really giving a good explanation as to why these groups are bad and why their beliefs are wrong. Rather, you're simply just boiling it down to the fact that they are being backed by a rival country or are useful idiots for that rival country, which really isn't that much of a convincing reason to oppose them when you actually take the time to think about it. It ignores other issues with these groups and their beliefs and just simply comes off as a cheap smear tactic, if you ask me. I know this may sound like a stretch of a comparison, but it's often forgotten by many that during the Cold War, the anti war movements at the time were often smeared as Russian and communist assets by conservatives because of how the Soviet Union at the time promoted its foreign policy through the World Peace Council and how some KGB Soviet defectors claimed that the Soviets had funded certain people within the anti war movements during the Vietnam War. If we were to go back in time to those days, you would have had American conservatives baselessly accusing anti war movements of being Russian controlled puppets, despite Western intelligence agencies themselves not even agreeing with such accusations and finding them to be exaggerated. Kind of similar to the other baseless accusations of QAnon being a Russian psyop, despite the fact that not even Western intelligence agencies believe that. At the end of the day, the reason why the anti-war movement in America during the Vietnam War became successful wasn't because it was some kind of Russian communist conspiracy to end US world policing. Rather because there were plenty of Americans at the time who opposed their government's imperialist actions in Vietnam for real, legitimate reasons that had nothing to do with being paid by the Russians or supporting communism. This is what I mean when I say it comes off as a cheap smear tactic that ignores political realities and kind of comes off as a conspiracy theory. Even if the Soviet Union didn't try to fund or influence the anti war movements at the time, those movements would have still become popular for a lot of reasons. Another issue with the whole topic surrounding Russia is also how some liberals tend to exaggerate the issue of Russian bots and often at times just use it to accuse everyone they don't like of being Russian bots. As even pointed out by Bellingcat, baselessly accusing someone of being a Russian bot on Twitter seems to have become the go-to insult for many when they disagree with someone. One of the silliest examples of this is when Russian trolls were blamed for half of the online backlash that Star Wars The Last Jedi received online, despite the fact that the report that was being cited for this claim only focused on tweets that were directed at the film's director, Rian Johnson, and even though the actual report itself stated that only less than 10% of those tweets were from Russian trolls, not even close to the 50% number that was being reported and spread by people. And I even remember recently when I once saw someone on a YouTube comment section on a Batman video getting called a Russian troll just because they were posting comments that were annoying. Now, I don't deny that Russian trolls and Russian bots are a thing, but it's also important to remember that not everyone who disagrees with you online is some Russian bot. At the end of the day, when it comes to disinformation and conspiracy theories that you see online, most of the people that you'll find spreading them are real people who can think for themselves and who aren't being paid by the Russian government to do so. And just because an account is a bot doesn't have to necessarily mean that it's a Russian one either. Sometimes it's just some random troll running more than one sock puppet account. And yes, I say this from experience. When it comes to the threats that Russian bots pose to public opinion on certain topics, one has to remember that it really isn't that much of a threat for the most part, and that Russian bots usually tend to be very easy to spot and usually tend to be more involved in things that actually affect Russia's global image, like the conflicts in Ukraine and Syria, for example. If Russian bots were as effective at influencing public opinion, like the way many make them out to be, Russia and Putin's global image wouldn't be so overwhelmingly negative according to polls, especially in places like Europe and North America. And when it comes to the whole topic surrounding the 2016 US elections and how Russia tried to influence who Americans voted for, one big thing that needs to be remembered is that over 61 million Americans voted for Trump that year. Now, I'm obviously not a fan of Trump, but do you really think that most of these 61 million Americans voted for him simply because they saw a few posts on Facebook or Twitter from some anonymous troll account telling them that Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist? No, because at the end of the day, there are millions of Americans who hate Hillary Clinton and or support Donald Trump for a number of real reasons that have nothing to do with Russian bots. Hillary Clinton is one of the most hated politicians in the United States for a number of reasons, and Donald Trump's campaign focused on him being a populist outsider. And the conspiracy theories that were being spread that year, such as Pizzagate, for example, were mostly being spread by people doing it on their own free will. Focusing on Russian trolls trying to influence who Americans voted for, as the case for Trump's 2016 victory, just comes off as a simplistic scapegoat that ignores political realities. With or without Russian meddling in the US elections, the alt-right and the MAGA movement would have all still been a thing, and we still would have had the Electoral College deciding who the victor of the election was. With the current state of the Republican Party and the popularity of Trumpism and nationalistic populism on the right, I'm afraid that Democrats simply pointing the finger at Russia isn't what's going to fix any of these problems. Even if Russia's relationship with the West was more friendly and peaceful, we still would be dealing with these issues one way or another. To repeat myself one last time, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with talking about Russian disinformation and how Russia capitalizes on conspiracy theories and extremists. But at the same time, this shouldn't be used as a simplistic scapegoat and exaggerated into this crazy boogeyman for these issues, nor should it be used as a cheap smear tactic to discredit any and all criticisms of Western liberal governments and establishments. When you engage in behavior like that, all you are doing is turning the topic surrounding Russia into a meme, and if anything, you're just turning yourself into a different type of conspiracy theorist. To end this video with some word of advice, always try to remember that there is way more to these issues than simply the Russian government. And try your best not to use the fear of Russia to dismiss any issue that some people may have with Western liberal democracies, and to turn yourself into some bootlicker for Western governments and establishments. Try to look at these things with more nuance instead of in a way that comes off as like a hysterical simpleton. And always try to remember that there are other ways to combat right wing extremists or any form of extremists other than simply pointing at Russia.